405 was one of the company's biggest hits, selling more than 500,000 in its first year alone. And then there's this, the Mi16, often described as one of the best affordable sporting saloons of the 80s, perhaps even of all time. But here's the strange part, this is also the car that ended Peugeot's American adventure. It was the last ever that they sold in the US. So today I want to find out if this really is as good as everyone says, and if so, why it bombed in the US. The competitors at the time would have been the Sierra XR4, the MG Montego, the Cavalier SRI and the Alpha 155. The Sierra in particular, with its V6, should have had an advantage, but the 405 wiped the floor with all of them. The secret was in Peugeot's starting point. Even the base model 405 was clearly designed by people who loved driving. It had fully independent suspension all round, so that's McPherson struts at the front, trailing arms at the rear. And this is at a time when most of its competitors made do with a cheap beam axle. The body was stiff too. Critics moaned about the small boot opening and the fixed rear seats, but it was all deliberate. It made the shell stronger, which meant that the car handled better. Then Peugeot turned that solid base into the decade's best affordable sporting saloon, the Mi16. I can already hear people furiously tapping. But what about the BMW 325i? Well, when this was launched in '87, it retailed for £14,300. The BMW would have cost you at least £3,000 more, and that's before adding in all the options which Peugeot threw in as standard. Under the bonnet was a naturally aspirated 16-valve, double overhead cam, 2-litre engine, producing 160 horsepower and merrily revving all the way to 7,200 RPM. It was no parts bin motor. Reputedly, each one cost Peugeot £3,000 to build. They had magnesium valve covers, lightweight flywheels and competition-grade valve gear. They stiffened and lowered the suspension. They added a subtle body kit and some special alloys which went really well with the crisp Pininfarina styling. This one, in addition, is a Le Mans model. It was released to celebrate Peugeot's win, and it included special features like the wheels, which were more like the 306 items, and also some extra things on the inside. You'd probably never know, but this shared the same platform and engine from the BX16 valve. A much quirkier car, and one that I myself loved, having had it a couple of years ago. But I have to say, as a driver's car, it really can't quite compare to the 405. This one is a 1994 model. That means it came after the facelift. Unfortunately, that also means that the engine was slightly down on power, 153 instead of 160. But on the plus side, it was now all aluminium, so it was lighter. And the interior on the facelifts is vastly improved, much more solid, less fragile and rattly than the originals. So on paper, it sounds like a recipe for success. Let's take it out on the road and find out if that's true. And I also want to try and work out why it was such a big flop in the US. First of all, a few words about this particular car, because it's quite a special one. It is a Le Mans, so it has those different exterior wheels. It's a special colour as well. This red was only available in this model. But also inside it has the 306 style seats with the Alcantara centres and the Le Mans badges. Now it shows 142,000 miles on those clocks, but you certainly would never tell. It's had a complete restoration, and it is so good that Tolman themselves, famous for producing their updated 205 GTI, are using this as a reference to rebuild another car. So big thanks to Jez, but also to Tolman for bringing it down today. This is the bit now though where we're going to go through the gears, and this engine, I know from my BX that it's a little delight, so I can promise you, I at least, am going to really enjoy this. God, Peugeot really knew how to build drivers' cars in the late 80s and early 90s. Just driving it down before when I was pootling along slowly, it was all right. You know, it wasn't bad. I didn't have much to complain about. I think the steering wheel could be in a slightly different position. It's a bit too tilted forward, a little bit too low. You know, it's a little bit jittery over the bumps. It's not too firm, but certainly it's not French in that way. You know, you can feel the suspension is firm, but then take it through the gears, start going through the corners, and immediately it all comes together in a way which is still astonishing. This has one of the best front ends of any car I've ever driven. They've just got everything absolutely spot on. From the way that the steering, from the speed of the steering, to the fact that the feel is just, you know, it's shouting at you, it's telling you exactly what it's doing, and it feels completely planted. Most front drive cars like this, immediately you can feel, push it further, and it will just plow on. This doesn't feel like that at all. Once you're up to speed, the ride is supple but controlled. The steering is brimming with feel. It's playful and precise all at once. It's a masterpiece. That engine, oh my God, it's just so fizzy. Let's just get it down into third, 4,000 revs. It's so willing. Both the engine and the chassis just egg you along. And then you go down the road, you hit some bumps and you think, oh, is it all going a little bit sideways? But no, because the chassis handles them perfectly. These Peugeots, my 306 as well, down this stretch of road, they are just a masterclass of how a car should handle. Because they're front wheel drive, anyone can make the most out of them. Although in theory, I have heard, they can be a bit of snappy on liftoff. But my 306 was supposed to be like that as well, and it never seemed to bother me. Maybe modern tyres have tamed that. Yeah, but go in and that front end just digs in, and there's no fancy sort of limited slip diff here or anything like that to hold it all together. This is just chassis wizardry. The gearbox is light and crisp. This is just a car which is designed to be driven. It doesn't feel all that dissimilar to my 306, which I don't think is a big surprise. There's a bit more maturity in it, I think. Let's take it through the gears again. Now it does go up to 7.2, but the red line is at about 6.9, and to be honest, I don't think there's much point in going past that. As you sort of change up, it goes into the sweet spot anyway, so... Oh. I mean, eventually it does feel like it wants to go wide. Under power, it is still a front-wheel drive car, but it's adjustable. So if you feel like it's going to start pushing, let go of the throttle, it tucks in really nicely, becomes very neutral again. It's just a brilliant chassis. Now, if there is one bad thing we can say about the early cars, it's that the interiors really were a little bit subpar. Didn't look particularly good, but they were also built to a price. These facelifts are miles better. There's still the odd light little squeak that you can hear, but it looks better, it feels much more solid as well. Externally, the facelift was fairly mild, and I think it mainly concerned the back of the car where they got some updated lights. As I mentioned, they opened up the boot cavity opening a little bit. I actually think that the original back end probably looked a little bit better. Also, although I like these wheels, the ones that came in the non-Le Mans models I think also suit this car very well. Overall, it's a great looking thing. Now, Peugeot had huge success in touring cars around this time, and also in rallying with the T16. And you can see where it came from. The DNA is all here. So look, if the 405 and the Mi16 in particular, if they're so brilliant, why did this car flop in America? Now, there's a few reasons for this, really. I think the first is that Peugeot had had 30 years up at this point in America, and their range had dwindled down, the cars they were selling, just to the 505. Now, that was a big rear-wheel drive saloon, which, bizarrely, in America at least, had a luxury-orientated reputation. And that was changed, and it went to a smaller, maybe a bit, a bit cheaper feeling front-wheel drive car. And our friends across the pond didn't particularly like that. Added to that, Peugeot's dealer network over there was absolutely tiny and pretty atrocious, something that is particularly important if you want to succeed on the continent. The nail in the coffin, though, is that for the same price, they could buy a V8 360 horsepower sedan. So they looked upon the 405 as an underpowered, expensive European oddity. But the Americans missed out, because the Mi16 wasn't just another sporting saloon. It was one of the finest driver's cars of its era. Now, if you want to buy one, I have some bad news. In the UK, there's none for sale. There are quite a few in France, though. If you can put up with left-hand drive, you'll find projects starting at about 4,000 or 5,000 euros, and cars that look decent for sort of 10 to 12,000, and it's a lot of car for that money. Do make sure you don't get drawn in by the 4x4. It's a car which is really only better than this in the snow or heavy rain or slippery conditions. Otherwise, all you're going to do is add weight. It's no better, it's probably worse to drive than these. So don't bother with that, go for the standard cars. Well, it's easy to see why this was so much better than the others. The Cavalier SRI was really all engine and practically no chassis. There's no way it could compete with this on most levels. The Sierra would have had that V6, but the Cologne V6 was quite an old engine. It wasn't the best six-cylinder out there. And in terms of handling, although it was rear-wheel drive, and it wasn't too bad, it just doesn't have the fluency of the Peugeot. The Alpha 155, or the first one that they made, the first series, was just outright awful. I'm not talking about that. They did a second series, which I think came out in 1990. It was a facelift, which had a wider front end. It looked sharper. They'd reworked the suspension, and now that car gives this a run for its money in terms of outright fun. But it's not as complete as the 405, and more of an acquired taste more generally. Now, what's just come, we were talking earlier, and they also mentioned a Primera, which is a very good car, but that came out, I think, in the early 90s, so towards the end of the run. If you wanted quite a handsome but practical car as well, there's plenty of room in the back, the boot's big enough, but something that you could have fun with on the weekends. If you had a family, when you went out for a blast, not with your family, and you could drive it hard, then this was going to be very, very hard to beat. Huge thanks to Jez and to Jason at Tolman for bringing the car down to me today. Now, if you enjoyed this, do check out my video about the 405 more generally. I did a lower spec model some time ago, but I give the whole history about the car. It's a really interesting thing in itself. It was massively popular, built in loads of countries, and has a story that needs to be heard. So check it out. Thank you so much, and see you for the next one.